particular kind of not only racial project, but gendered one, class-based project. That in many ways it represents a kind of distillation of a lot of different currents about people trying to define who is an American, who deserves, who deserve equal rights, or on the terrain of stuff. So it's not trying to skirt it, but it says to think about that abstractly is much more difficult than to try to locate it within a kind of particular kind of historical expression or moment in which these things come together in some ways. And a lot of this is really difficult. I'm gonna slightly segue off that because I wanted to say something about the colorblindness stuff too. Our position too has been tempered and informed a lot by, I mentioned Osagi's work earlier. He's got a terrific book out called Blinded by Sight. Is that the right title, Osagi? No? Yeah, okay. In which it involves a lot of in-depth interviews with people who have been blind since birth and how they understand race. And what's very interesting then, it sort of tempers a kind of reliance on kind of simply the ocular dimensions of race that are extremely visible, but in fact the ways in which social relationships, that even the blind understand race in a racialized society and what it means. And that has certain kinds of implications then. Osagi transfers this to look at sort of colorblind jurisprudence in the law and to think about the ways in which that is only sort of a kind of a partial, a very distorted grasp of what colorblindness means. I'm sorry, I want to tap that out to your question.
We have time for about one more question, and I just want to say that we do have a reception afterwards, so we'll be able to speak with the authors a little more, and we also have books here for a book signing and sale. So if you brought your own, great, and if you need to buy a copy, we're here to sell it at a discounted price of $30, all inclusive. So I saw a hand up there. Yes.
Great, thank you. So you talk about trajectories, so kind of like Tea Party, maybe Occupy might be a counterpart. Both were seen as predominantly white. What moment are we in now? Like with Black Lives Matter and it quickly becoming All Lives Matter for some people. We even saw that here at Berkeley, where black students occupied or blockaded the cafe, Golden Bear Cafe, and then days later, 5 days of protest, where Black Lives Matter was no longer the cry. Once people got over there on that bridge or towards that bridge. So what is this current moment and how is this sort of, where are we at in this sort of ebb and flow?
I really think colorblindness is coming apart in some ways. It's a slow unraveling. It's not an easy thing for us to accomplish. We have a tremendous movement in this country. It's often not recognized to what extent there is a massive grassroots, largely decentered, particularly youth-driven movement to challenge racism in this country. And it's not only to challenge racism, it's largely anti-sexist too, it's largely anti-homophobic too, I'm not saying completely, and it has strong class elements too. I'm not saying these things are easily synthesized, but that kind of thinking is going on a grassroots level in this country right now, and it's being forced on us by repression. Again, the state needs race to rule. This is totally obvious in the Ferguson, Garner. You all know the list. The list goes on and on. The list gets longer every day. It's not only a black list, by the way. It's also a brown list. It's even occasionally a white list of people who are being killed. Just reading about, and then the current New Yorker, there's a big thing about the Albuquerque Police Department, and how they're killing mentally ill people because it's such a pain in the ass to deal with them. It's so much easier to just kill them. So it's very prevalent situation, and it's producing this resistance. Now, the state needs race to rule, but as it has to reassert its racism, basically, its white supremacy in its rule, it's unraveling this notion that we're beyond color, that we're beyond race. And, you know, again, it's not the state that's unraveling it, it's us who are unraveling it. Now, what happens with that? Clearly, in terms of Republicans, the white people's party in this country, I mean, we're in a situation where we have the two major political parties, one of them is white. It doesn't mean that there's not a sprinkling of dark faces. I mean, so and I'm not saying that the Democratic Party isn't also white supremacist, but it's a whole different story there. I mean, so you know, we're seeing a tremendous upsurge of racial conflict and racial tension and related other, let's call it, identity politics and class politics tension. And so I think it's the most explosive moment we've been in since the, you know, I would say since the Black Power era. You know, and where is it going? No one can predict, but it seems clear that the Republicans are really, really freaked out about a majority-minority politics. The anti-immigration stuff is a clear instance of that. I mean, it's a huge polarization. It's frightening to have this level of racial conflict. It's frightening to have this level of political conflict in the country, but it's necessary. And one only hopes that it you know, does not generate a widespread quasi-fascist reaction. That's quite possible. That's always the danger. But if that doesn't happen, I don't think that, you know, revolution is on the cards in the United States. I'm maybe offending somebody in this room. So if that's not the case, you know, what one hopes for is enough political pressure to force significant reforms. Again, the cycle, the trajectory that we've seen over and over in the past. But it's our struggles that make those things happen.
No, I'll make this short. You know, I think there is, you know, we may see a huge number of contradictions emerging around the notion of colorblindness. What worries me is that, in fact, we've always had these kinds of flashpoints. We thought during, in the wake of Hurricane Katrina, there would be a national dialogue and conversation about race and class-based inequality. And everybody thought this is the moment for that. And yet it sort of faded from sort of collective memory. And a lot of the sort of policies which were originally sort of even speculated upon, you know, sort of never really went to fruition. So my fear is around the fact that these flashpoints around, particularly the kind of militarization of police violence being directed particularly towards to black and brown bodies, may be a kind of flashpoint for now, but what happens in the long run, you know? And whether or not that leads to a much more kind of sustained conversation about these things. Because my fear is that there still is this kind of hegemonic aspect of colorblindness, which suggests that acts like these are kind of abnormal, unusual instances of racism. It's when a Donald Sterling makes racist comments about his athletic franchise. It's about a shooting, let's say, in Ferguson or name your city, you know, and that for some people represents a kind of, yes, that's racism, but that's sort of it's abnormal. It seems as something that isn't part of the sort of normal functioning of the ways institutions work, or the ways in which embedded notions about race exist in people's minds as they navigate through their daily life. So I guess the point makes for a lot of caution here in some ways, that in fact there is still a kind of hegemonic understanding about what racism is too, and that is that it's the abnormal, the unusual, the things that are outside the cycle of what we should be, since we, you know, with the passage of significant pieces of legislation, we shouldn't be discriminating anymore. It's illegal. Not to say that policies and practices, from home mortgage rates to anything else, continue to reproduce those kinds of inequalities. But it is to say that it is in many ways very difficult to work against that hegemonic discourse, to think about strategically what you do, how you mobilize, what are the themes that you bring to the table in order to make folks understand that these kinds of issues about racism are really the normal way things work, you know, and have worked that way for quite a long time.
So Joy, please join me in